former Secretary, Ministry of Rural Development, Government of India, and presently serving as member, Public Enterprises Selection Board. Mr. Andrew Goodland, lead
morning session. There's a few sort of key themes which you're already hearing. I mean, firstly, there's this almost these two conflicting narratives we hear about the rural space in India. Firstly, of course, there's the incredible progress which has been made, the social mobilization, the poverty reduction, reduction in food insecurity, financial inclusion. (2047) is the current rural development model going to be able to deliver on that aspiration? Next, we saw the role of the rural economy during COVID, being able to support the country's resilience. When we think about these other external shocks, whether climate change, resource degradation, I mean, how is the rural economy going to be able to help the country to respond to those? And finally, are the institutional framework, is the institutional framework which is in place the right one to continue to deliver on the goals of rural growth? Is both on the public side and on the private side, is the institutional framework agile enough to be able to respond to these emerging challenges? So to discuss these questions and many more, I'm really delighted to be joined by a very esteemed panelist. Let me quickly, I think actually most people know everyone on stage apart from me. But let me introduce them. Firstly, Mr. Amarjit Singha. He's one of the key architects, I would say, of rural development in India. He's had a highly distinguished career, including as Secretary in the Ministry of Rural Development. He's currently posted as a member of the Public Enterprises Selection Board. He has 40 years of experience in government and played a major role in many of the rural development programs, health, education, infrastructure, governance, and of course, was highly involved in the NRLM. In between all of that, he's also an academic and has found time to write a number of books. And he just informed me that I'll put a pitch in for you, that your new book is coming out in September on the last mile. So welcome, Mr. Sinha. Yamini Iyer is president of the Center of Policy Research, a leading think tank in India. She's made substantial contributions to rural development through her research, policy analysis, and advocacy work. Her work at CPR is focused on key areas such as governance, public service delivery, and decentralization, subjects on which she has a numerous publication. She is alumnus of the University of Cambridge, we have that in common, and the London School of Economics and St. Stephen's College. So welcome, Yamini. Mr. Manish Sabharwal is the CEO and co-founder of Team Lease, India's largest staffing company. He's also an entrepreneur, a writer, and a member of the Central Advisory Board of Education, and was recognized as a young global leader by the World Economic Forum. He's a member of the National Skill Mission and has served on various policy committees for education, employment, and employability. He received his MBA from Wharton and is alumnus of Sherman College, Delhi, and Mayo College, Ajmer. So welcome to all of the panelists. I'm very happy that you're all here today. So the format of this session, Mr. Sinha will make a presentation, then I'll ask both Yamini and Manish to make some reflections and comments on that, and then time permitting, we'll have a few Q&A. So, Mr. Sinha, over to you. Thank you.
Good morning, friends. Very happy to be with friends again after a long time. The group sitting before me, both from the civil society, state governments, people associated with the livelihood mission for a long time. Most of you know much more than what I do, but all I'm trying to do is to present before you, when trying to reflect on whatever has been attempted, to see what is the best way forward for us, where are we, and what is it that we can do. A lot of what I'm going to present before you, I have learned from the likes of Alok Dey, Saurav, and others sitting here. They have really taught us on understanding many aspects of women's collectives and what it does in our movement forward. If I were to very broadly look at all the assessments, evaluations, for, against, everything, on the positive side, we will say that the economy is currently one of the fastest growing economies post-COVID. The UNDP 2022 report also said that 415 million out of multidimensional poverty, though of course, during the period of COVID, there are examples, and that's why the gains are a little fragile, of some falling back into poverty as well. The digital public infrastructure and the DBT, which does seem to make a difference. The COVID vaccination management. The vaccination management I'm highlighting because there could be issues on the larger frame, but in terms of the vaccination management, clearly, there has been a major move forward. Pro-poor public welfare, because whether it is the NFHS 5, 2019 to 21, or the 78th round NSSO, the gains do show there on many parameters, which include access to electricity, which includes improved housing in rural areas, which includes not 100%, but close to 70-75% households having a toilet and using it too, and so on. On the gas connection, again, that's the issue which is on the right side as well. When I have highlighted incomes and employment as challenges, I think the gas connections is a true reflection of that. While it is true that the Ujjwala program, the coverage is more than 100 million over so many years, but it's also a challenge that even today in Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh, Odisha, 1 in 4 is using it sustainably for cooking. It is also a fact, and that's what the NSSO as also the NFHS say, that 49% are using that Ujjwala sustainably for cooking their meals. So clearly, the challenge of incomes and employment is a very serious one. The learning poverty issue. Again, when the Morgan Stanley report came, a lot of the points I've highlighted on the left side have got covered. And one of the findings about the consumption expenditure not rising adequately. The other, that perhaps what T.N. Nayanan pointed out, when the agriculture GDP, if it is 25% more than the manufacturing GDP, he has raised some issues on how it may well be a case of some underemployment and the challenges for those on the margins just out of multidimensional poverty, but what the fragile gains can lapse back into poverty if we are not able to take care of some of the requirements, which I'll highlight as I go on. The human capital challenge, which is something which globally the point is raised. We continue to be at 130 on the Human Development Report, and clearly, as I present the case on where we need to move, its importance. The public good gaps, Ashoka Modi has highlighted it in particular, both the human capital challenge as also the public goods gap and the employment. But more importantly, as we reimagine rural, we cannot do so without thinking of the urban. Because half of the country, in any case, is expected to be urban earlier than later. Are we prepared for it in the urban areas? How exactly will the rural migrants integrate with urban economies? We have already nearly 4,000 census towns, large number of Nagar Panchayats, 300 urban clusters taken up on an experiment, and some findings of it also I'll share. Emergence of the market towns in many places. It is true that things have changed. And what held true for India's economy pre-91 and post-91 as a broad trend, from a 3.5% average growth rate, we did move to 7% post-91 on an average. Likewise, when you look at social indicators, on a number of them, whether it is infant mortality, maternal mortality, under 5 mortality, on many of those parameters, post 2005-6, the pace of improvement seems better than in the earlier periods. What holds true for the economy in 91 holds partly true for social development post 2005-6. The urban structure, I was just sharing it here because clearly the urban effort faced some serious challenges, and this is relevant in reimagining rural. We wanted to create 10 to 20,000, 25,000 population urban clusters in a more planned way with economic activity, with basic amenities, with social amenities, and with digital connect and so on. Now, the 3 problems in particular which I thought are relevant here. The first and foremost is a leadership issue. The moment you put together a cluster of 15 or 20,000 population in any part of India, except Kerala, Bihar, West Bengal, where panchayats are large, you actually work with 7-8 panchayats or maybe 10 panchayats. So leadership, who is going to lead that urban cluster? The second issue is about standards. We have a Town and Country Planning Act which notifies planning areas which are near urban areas. Many states, as yet, do not have a system of planned facility development in rural areas. Kerala uses the the constitution and the Panchayati Raj provisions to actually implement and enforce some standards. Karnataka, I think, has town and country planning provisions for rural areas as well. So standard setting is the second issue. And the third issue is the financing issue. Because clearly, in terms of the infrastructure deficits, many of these emerging non-farm clusters have huge infrastructure deficits. Three of these issues, in the approach adopted for both the first and the second, the CEPT Ahmedabad and the School of Planning and Architecture, have come out with very good standards. They have tried to resolve the leadership challenge through some systems. But on the financing, what we say as financing through convergence, the experience has been that in many parts, that resource is already earmarked for something else. So if we really wish to create these growth points, we'll have to visualize it from these three major challenges. If I look across the world, education and human well-being has mattered for sustainable economic progress across the world. And nothing demonstrates it better than this particular graph on girls' education and how much difference it makes. Japan, which managed to universalize primary education for girls in way back 1915, 1920, its trajectory. Korea, which did that in 1960s. 1920, Korea, India, China, we are all at the same level. The Asian countries are all at the same level. Thereafter, Korea's trajectory, which is that black dotted line, China's trajectory, which is that yellow line, and Bangladesh and India here in orange and green. How much it makes a difference, we are all aware. Educating the girl child is one, if you are looking for one single cause, nothing stands out more starkly than this. Unfortunately, it doesn't get written about enough. And I'll illustrate as I move on. Recently, the World Bank has come out with a detailed study on how China managed to bring about 800 million out of poverty over a period of 40 years. Besides the initial condition of primary education and nutrition, they identified broad-based economic transformation. So it is not so much just poverty programs as integration in an economic growth process. Poverty alleviation for geographies and households was practiced in China as well, but it was one of the components of the overall strategy. The lessons are clear. Economic growth with opportunities is needed if we even want rural India to be completely free from poverty and with better status of human well-being. Urbanization is needed for poverty reduction. Women's collectives do make a difference, and especially in the coming slides, I'll just try to share that. How agriculture, productivity, manufacturing, and services, all three had a role in poverty reduction in China. It wasn't just one sector. The initial condition of education and nutrition did make a difference. Now, if I were to look at, just to understand this issue better, if you take three states with similar population, 6 to 7 crores, Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, and Karnataka, interestingly, their per capita incomes are also identical, about 2.5 lakhs. But when you start looking at the multi-dimensional poverty, then you find there are differences. Tamil Nadu having the best indicators with only 4.9, 4.8%. That too, before the fifth NFHS, it will be a little lower now. But Karnataka had 13% multidimensional poor, Gujarat had 18%. Now, what it indicates is, even with the same level of per capita incomes, there could be differences as far as the multidimensional poverty status is concerned. When you move further and drill down further, since it's a livelihood mission group, therefore I raise it here. When you look at Karnataka, the annual borrowing is about 22,000 crores for women SHGs in that state. In Tamil Nadu, it's about 12,000 crores, 11,000 crores. But somehow this, while the women's cooperatives are very active, the primary dairy cooperatives are very, very active in Gujarat, but financing through the women's collectives still needs a lot of speeding up. So the point I wish to make, the role of educating the girl child, the role of access to credit to women. And this comes out very clearly when we look at this particular slide. In the course of researching for my forthcoming book, The Last Mile, Turning Public Policy Upside Down, I was trying to understand, everybody says southern Indian states have far less poverty. When I started reading the research that is published, many of them of very high quality, but all of them tended to have a tubular view. Somebody is looking at credit, somebody is looking at gender, somebody is looking at something else. But when you start to put together the full story on why southern Indian states poverty declined faster, 6 factors stand out. The foremost is educating the girl child, high adolescent girls' participation in higher secondary and higher education, well before many of the northern Indian states. Between 2010 and 15, secondary enrollment for girls in Bihar, Jharkhand, Odisha, Madhya Pradesh, West Bengal has also gone up sizably. But the early lead came in the southern Indian states. When that happens, there's a very strong correlation with decline in fertility. Immediately, replacement level fertility is where most of the southern Indian states reached much before the others. Improvement in healthcare services. It becomes important if adolescent girls have to join higher education or participate in vocational education. It requires better maternal and child health care, smaller families, formation of women self-help groups. Now, women, when they cycle to a college or a high school, for the first time, they get a new identity. Nobody's daughter, nobody's sister, nobody's wife, but a woman unto her own. And that makes a difference. Livelihood diversification through skills. When I'm educated up to 10th or 12th, nursing schools, IT training opportunities, ITIs, lot of these opportunities, especially in Tamil Nadu and Andhra, more than other states, were available. And last but not the least, what Dr. Rangarajan did 30 years ago, to provide for collateral-free lending up to rupees 10 lakhs for women SHGs. And when you look at the profile, till 2013-14, as recently as 2013-14, 86.2% of the SHG lending was only going to the 5 southern Indian states, because that is where the collectives were there. And clearly, these 6 factors seem to have played a very important role in reduction of poverty. Even when you look at this figure of multidimensional poverty that Niti Aayog brought out, why the bottom half, the southern Indian states, are all either dark green or light green. Multidimensional poverty rates were much lower. I think it's important that in recent years, the decline, this is the UNDP 2022 report, what it points out that states with higher levels of absolute poverty are also the states where more reduction seems to have happened. The balloons are large because the number of absolute poor is still large. But when you look at the 2 axes on the rate of decline of MPI value, many of the states with higher poverty seems to have moved faster. The other thing worth looking at, this is from the economic survey last year's, which looked at factory employment across states. As to be was expected, Tamil Nadu, Gujarat, Maharashtra, they figure at the top. Uttar Pradesh, because it is a large state. But here also the correlation between factory employment and lower poverty, except for Delhi for different reasons, because this is only doing the absolute numbers. But if you do it as a percentage, clearly it's not just poverty programs that help in reducing poverty. The road construction, the factory employment, all these make perhaps even a bigger difference. Even the studies by the World Bank, Martin and others, did bring out the point on how perhaps PMGSY roads may well have led to faster decline of poverty than even the poverty programs. Friends, so the corollary is that if you want to reimagine rural India, you will have to look at what helps private investment. In any case, the private investment is not kicking up as much as we are expecting for some reason or the other. But we will need to, even in the Bihars and Jharkhands and Odisha and Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarhs, private investment would be needed if we need to make a difference to rural poverty as well. Because employment's higher order skills and higher order employment is a requirement. It is not so much the cost of doing business as the convenience of doing it. It is not that in any state, suddenly everything is hunky-dory. There are challenges. But when anyone invests resources, they want the convenience of getting things done on time. They want human capital. They want the land records to be clean and clear. They want access to credit. They want a single window facilitation. These are all known to people who've been working in these sectors, but for some reason or the other, in the permanent settlement areas, Bihar, Odisha, there are challenges with regard to the land records. In the other states as well. But human capital, why is it that private investments go to Tamil Nadu, go to Gujarat, go to the same Hyderabad and Andhra? Why does it focus on those, Delhi? It will go where human capital is also available, among other factors. So there's no going away from better human capital in rural areas. This is the transformation that is important, and I compliment each one of you because you have all been part of this. And that transformation is that what used to be, what worked in the southern Indian states is what we tried to push very strongly, systematically in all the states of the country. From 25 million women in the livelihood mission, we have 90 million today. And more than 6,35,000 crores credit in the last 9 years. What is the NPA? 1.9%. They put to shame the private sector. We have had a lot of banking systems looking for collaterals and mortgages for everything. I was recently in Bombay meeting the governor RBI and also at the Reserve Bank Innovation Hub. I have raised this issue repeatedly in many fora, including the Women's World Banking International Conference recently. How do you decide credit worthiness? These women are poor, but they still pay back. Why don't we look at what works in this? The evidence is to the contrary. The more credit worthy, we seem to be defaulting more. It's almost an inverse relationship. Whereas if you do it systematically with some of these social groups through collectives, it makes a difference. And the changes are there to see. States like my own home state of Bihar, from a few hundred crores, this year they have crossed 10,000 crores of lending with 1.7% as the NPA. West Bengal is more than 14,000 crores today. Orissa was at 5,000 last year, 9,000 crores now. So instead of 86% just in the 5 southern Indian states, a large volume of livelihood credit directly to SHGs. I will make a distinction between a microfinance institution and the SHG lending. Microfinance lending is good for consumption, good for debt redemption. It is not a competitive loan for economic activity. If I borrow at 28%, and you borrow at 11%, how do I compete? Whereas a direct lending to an SHG is 11 or even less, because 4% interest subvention is available in many parts of the country. So clearly, for economic activity, it's important that this portfolio expands further. It has reached 6,35,000 crores over 9 years. It has a potential to go to 60 lakh crores. And one of the things which will aid this is this new program that we started for land records and titles for housing areas in rural India. As many of you are aware, a large part of the country is already surveyed and titles have been provided through a card. Banks are recognizing it for credit. Otherwise, the paradox was, I cannot mortgage my agriculture land And I have no record for my urban housing rather in rural areas. What the Swamitva program is doing is creating that entitlement. A lot of them have started borrowing against that. The livelihood mission needs to align with that process as well, along with the fact that it really needs to ensure what has been done for housing. Women must be an owner. I think a lot of the issues, even about inheritance, property rights, we need to revisit to be able to ensure that women-led development, which will really make the difference as far as inclusivity is concerned. Well, 7 factors in revisioning rural India. First and foremost, about breaking the undernutrition cycle. A mission, human development for local governance for the reasons that I mentioned. Inclusive cities with opportunities for investment and credit. Women-led development, milk cooperatives and SHGs as example. Continued inclusive infrastructure thrust. It's not that social development doesn't have an infrastructure deficit. Why can't I make better school buildings with infrastructure pipelines? Why can't I make better hospitals with infrastructure pipelines? Why can I not use it for nutrition and Anganwadi centers? Even they are part of infrastructure. They also generate jobs. It's important to understand that these are not binaries that you look at separately. Governance, accountability framework, water conservation and natural farming, the 7 themes. But the foremost learning from all the evidence before us across the world, you need a horizontal platform of community connect and participation if you want to move ahead systematically. There is no going away from strengthening the panchayat system, and now with the countervailing presence of community organizations like women SHGs, the need of the hour is for them to work together. 6-7 years ago, we had issued guidelines with regard to SHGs and PRI elected representatives working together. This needs focus. If I want change in nutrition, if I want change in human development, if I want change in inclusivity, we need an approach where a horizontal community connect is available at the doorstep. Not distant, but at the doorstep. To break the undernutrition cycle, it's no rocket science. Sikkim brought down stunting by 8 points between NFHS 4 and NFHS 5. Did somebody try to understand why it happened? The answers are quite simple. They did no rocket science. They did very, very simple things, and it worked. What did they do? They ensured these little things in every village. The community action, panchayats, cooperatives, SHGs, infrastructure, Anganwadis with a building of their own, measuring undernutrition, a community movement to measure. So many of us are sitting here. When we say that stunting is high, how many of us can measure an infant's weight? How many of us can measure the height of an infant? It's important. Unless and until it becomes a societal movement, and these 10 things have to happen together. There's nothing extraordinary here. Clean drinking water, sanitation, behavior change communication, food and nutrition diversity, availability of basic medicines, home-based newborn care, and invest in last-mile human resources. These things will not come free. We need to invest in a cadre of community resource persons, caregivers on a much larger scale. Unless and until, very basic points, if we are able to address the human resource challenge at the last mile, and in addressing the human resource challenge, we have to bear in mind that besides the funds, functions, functionaries with local governments and oversight of women's collectives, we need to ensure local government and community ownership, the untied funds for local action, community resource persons and professionals in HR. This is the lesson from the livelihood mission. After all, how did we reach 6,35,000 crores of lending? It's a tribute to those 47,000 bank sakhis sitting in the bank branch, doing the paperwork and ensuring that loans are accessed by women's groups. It's a tribute to the 100,000 women working as BC sakhis today, the banking correspondents. I remember 9-10 years ago, when we were walking the corridors of the Department of Financial Services, I was told, Oh, why do you need this? We don't need anything. We already have BCs everywhere. We have a commercial model. That commercial model was not reaching anywhere. The 1% model was just not reaching anywhere. There was a rule that one gram panchayat, only one bank. Why? Who will determine this? So we had to fight these battles, a small battle of dual authentication. SHG money it has got a president and a secretary. We don't want to do any transaction in cash. But what do? We didn't provide for a dual authentication at the level of the validation at the local level with my banking correspondent. The technology was possible. We did push them into it finally. The RBI approved that. On us, transactions are allowed, but off us are not. So if we want credit to flow to those who need it most, some of these challenges need a clear answer up to the last mile. The issue of, So the need for a continuum, I'll again emphasize. There has to be, we need to recruit locally and build capacities to be able to achieve what we want to do. The issue of, I'll not quickly, on the skills, the important lesson is that unless multiple pathways are internalized, the equivalence that we have all been talking about, that a 9th pass moves to a polytechnic, does 4 years, gets an equivalent of a certain degree or a diploma, and thereafter joins the system again. That was the idea of the skill and education working together with some kind of a detailed provision of equivalence. These are the challenges, and again, we cannot visualize vocational as a parallel means. It has to be with the education system. The two have to work together. In countries where it has worked, China gave up separate vocational schools, realizing that it became the poorer school. The Germany's approach of formal system actually engaging with other possibilities as well of vocational, perhaps is what we need to. I'll just quickly we have talked enough about it, but urban, just one point, what the literature tells me, the urban ward is not a communitization level. In big cities, 30,000 to 3 lakh people make an urban ward. The constitution does not come in the way. We need elected leadership of urban bodies at the Basti level. It is required for us to be able to handle the community connect better in urban areas. I've just listed it in the presentation, but on the women-led development, I don't need to except again re-emphasize women's name in land records. Whatever we may say for mobility, scooties to women cluster coordinators, I have seen it in many states. It gives an identity and does make a difference. But more importantly, lots of opportunities women have demonstrated in many parts of the country. In the Naxalite areas, all the public transport women's collectives are managing because they are the only ones who can go there without fear. The banking BC Sakhi. Technology is a means, it's not an end by itself. If it was not for this BC Sakhi, how would that 90-year-old widow on her deathbed be paid her pension on the deathbed? Technology affords that opportunity, and therefore, what the livelihood mission is pursuing, you've got 100,000 women now, every panchayat having a banking correspondent Sakhi does make a difference. It's also important that we measure poverty both at the household as also at the geography level. The Mission Antyodaya and the updated social registry based on the SECC is a possibility. Just 1 minute on this, since I just recently chaired a committee on MG and REGA reforms. On the left side, you look at the Rural Wealth Index, district-wise, which has been developed based on the NFHS indicators, some of them, about 36 indicators we have taken. On the right side, you see the mandates generation. Now, green areas here ought to be areas with lower mandates generation here, and the red areas here with more poverty ought to have more of the NREGA effort as a pro-poor program. Now, these are challenges on how do we address this. Accountability frameworks have to be strong, whether it is research, citizen-centric apps, geotagging, IT-DBT, community mobilization. So a lot of the groundwork is in place, but if you want to revisualize rural, it can't be without a lot of urban occupations as well. It cannot be without taking into account urbanization as a process. Water conservation, natural farming, I'm highlighting again at the end because clearly there is no going away from this. Whatever we do, unless and until water conservation is a priority, there are limits to where we will go. Some examples of the central Indian tribal region where breakthroughs have happened because of good civil society partners like Pradhan in the case, this is from Keonjhar, working with women's collectives, investments of MG and REGS going for creating assets, durable assets for those collectives, and how that leads to diversification of livelihoods on scale at the local level. Multiple livelihoods has to be accepted as a reality. It is not that one person and one job. No. We need multiple livelihoods to be able to sustain incomes in difficult times. Gujarat is a very good example where the primary dairy cooperatives serve like an ATM for households. The cash incomes keep coming to the household regularly because they're providing milk in the cooperative. Last, on waste to wealth, whatever we do, this is important. The Zakariapura model, which NDDB has experimented with, has worked quite well. Lot of slurry-based products are now available. They're doing well. Both solid and liquid materials are available. But to end, I think a women-led well-being needs a nutrition trust, the human development trust, credit linkage, inclusive urbanization, non-farm opportunities, decentralized community-owned trust, social registry and poverty of geographies and households with an accountability framework. And finally, skilled and educated India, healthy India, happy India, women-led India. I think human well-being is the key. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sinha. That was a fantastic overview of the challenges, but also the opportunities and evidence-based. So that's a great platform for us to now have further discussions. Let me straight away turn to Yamini, maybe add your perspectives. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a tough ask after that wonderful presentation that is so comprehensive. So maybe what I'll try and do is sort of think a little bit around the framing of the question that we are confronted with of reimagining rural development, and also address some of the implementation state capacity questions that this wonderful presentation raises. So I'm going to start with a quibble, and I think it's a major one that is worth addressing. If you really want to talk about the rural economy as a driver, you can't have a conference that is talking about reimagining rural development, because the rural economy, and we know this from the history of India's structural transformation, is at the core of the economy. You see transformation when you have productivity in the rural economy, which generates the surplus that pushes people off farm, that generates manufacturing. From the 2011 census, and whenever the new census comes out, is done and then comes out, we'll see this, I think, even more starkly. The bulk of Indian manufacturing, the bulk of the urban transition is happening in situ, in rural areas that are moving, and that movement comes when you generate rural productivity. So you cannot have an inclusive economy, and you cannot have GDP growth that is genuinely transformative for all Indians without a rural economy that is the driver of growth. And therefore, any conversation about reimagining rural development to me seems to be once again taking us right back into the very silos that we need to emerge from if we want to genuinely reimagine. So the conversation has to be, in my view, about reimagining the Indian economy rather than reimagining rural development per se. And the only way that reimagination can occur, in my view, is, again, if we ask the hard governance question of how do we actually exit out of silos. All that we know about India's structural transformation, both the progressive transformation that is taking us from farm to off farm, but also the reversal transformation that is currently underway of off farm coming back into farm, as our PLFS data is reminding us quite routinely, occurs on the back of a continuum. Yet we organize ourselves in, as rural development, agriculture, urban development, roads, highways, transportation, the MSME, corporation. In fact, the economy is an integrated actor. And because we organize ourselves as silos, we know how to do schemes within those silos. So each one of these issues that Mr. Sinha brought up so evocatively all has attached to it a centrally sponsored scheme or a state scheme, but the schemes never speak to each other. So you cannot actually build into investing in these continuums. A lot of conversation has happened in the last couple of hours this morning about rural urban. But how will you, in order for that rural urban continuum to take place, you need to be investing in the process of transformation, which is really hard to do when you have an urban housing scheme and a rural housing scheme, which is really hard to do when you have rural social protection, but you haven't thought through the urban social protection when the worker is going from rural to urban and coming right back. So the entire governance architecture needs to reimagine itself, just as our dialoguing around the Indian economy needs to reimagine ourselves, to think about it in a much more integrated, cohesive framework rather than the silos and the schemes. And that's a really hard ask because the Indian administration has organized itself, and therefore our financing for development has organized itself in this way. Linked to this is another silo I think we need to exit from, which is that we think very much about the Indian economy in frameworks of state versus market. Now, I'm not an advocate for excessive state. I know the regulatory cholesterol that the state brings into play, but I do think that our imagination of the economy has pushed us in a way where we always think in binaries of state market. All the success stories of India's development trajectory, many of which Mr. Sinha laid out in his presentation, have come about on the back of very deep state investment. Investment in building institutions, investment in building public infrastructure, investment in human capital, investment in humans, investment in individuals, investment in rural areas. It is through that investment that private investment and markets get derived, not by trying to move away from that investment, which is often how we talk about the rural economy. So we think of agriculture as a drag because rightly we need to move people outside of agriculture. We think of agriculture as something that needs to be freed of the state because rightly it is over-regulated, but it is also deeply underinvested. When you don't have physical public investment, public infrastructure in rural markets, and you say the state is exiting out of the way, then automatically you create a vicious cycle of wanting more investment in all the wrong things like excessive MSP on wheat and paddy when actually you need diversification. So how do you actually think about the relationship between state market in a way where we are asking the question of what are the forms of public investment that we need to get right in order to be able to drive private investment and private markets to do what they need to do, is at the heart, to my mind, of the question of what a reimagination of rural development ought to be like. And that means, again, we have to go back to asking questions about the economy, because we can't talk about rural development as NRLM, as PMGSY, as NREJ. It's actually about the continuum of all of these. And last but not least, on the question of institutions, many of these challenges will get resolved if we actually invest in our panchayats. As Mr. Sinha rightly pointed out, you're not going to have a robust economy without robust institutions of governance that start genuinely from bottom up. We've made more progress with panchayats than we have with municipalities. That's a well-known, sort of somewhat ironic fact. But even with panchayats, we have actually, the progress we have made has not been by design, I would argue, except in some states, it has been by accident. Because our design for what it takes to empower local governments is a design of conditionalities. It is to say, you will get money if you do X, as opposed to you tell me what you want to do and we will find ways of generating resources. So this conditionality-oriented empowerment of local governments, even plans, you will excuse me if I say this because we did, I think, because the GPDP was an attempt to try and bring 14 Finance Commission funds to panchayats, but it became a conditionality that undermined the panchayat period. So you compete. So in every attempt at trying to empower, we have actually taken many steps back. And the digital transformation also raises important questions for what the core role of the panchayat will be. Linked to that is the transformation of panchayats into municipalities. We know what a panchayat is, we know what a municipality is. We have no idea what the governance architecture of that transformation where urbanization is actually taking place in India ought to be. We need to have a new spatial imagination of local governance that may actually help us, I think, exit out of the failures of the past into a new way of thinking about local governments. Linked to all of this is a last challenge that I just want to throw up. Mr. Sinha rightly pointed out to the successes of rural transformation in southern India versus the challenges of many other parts of India, northern and eastern most starkly, and also the fact that many of the learnings from southern India have now been invested in and transported and invested in northern and eastern India, and we will see slowly we are actually seeing this expansion of the surface area of the state in rural India in a way that was unimaginable even 10 or 15 years ago. But the fact is that there is also a stagnation of how we think about the rural economy in southern in the relatively better off states. So number one, there's no one size fit all. This is a diverse country with deep inequities, and spatial inequities are really going to be the challenge going forward. The way I see it, I think some of the southern states are seeing a sort of classic middle income trap in how they're thinking about their rural economies. They've made significant progress, moved forward, but have not been able to make that integration from and invest in that transformation from rural to urban and from farm to off farm in a manner that is genuinely not fragile and sustainable. Whereas in northern India, we are still at 101 challenges, but we have an opportunity now to think about those 101 challenges from the point of view of investing in those continuums, because without that, we won't be able to genuinely ensure that we generate agricultural productivity whilst ensuring that we also are moving from farm to off farm in a long-term sustainable way. Everything else will start falling into place if we shift our imagination in that way. And that's what I would push for as we reimagine rural development to reimagining the Indian economy, period.
Thank you so much, Yamini. That's excellent. I asked you to provoke us to think differently, and that's exactly what you've done. That's great. So let me turn to Manish, please.
So obviously where you stand on an issue depends on where you sit, and where I sit is very different from the other two people. We've hired somebody every 5 minutes for the last 20 years, but we've only hired 5% of the kids who came to us for a job. So from where I sit, there are no such thing as poor people. There are only people in poor places, right? A guy from Balasore moves to Bhubaneswar, he gets 2 times more salary. He moves from Bhubaneswar to Bangalore, she gets 4 times more salary, and she moves from Bangalore to Switzerland, she gets 25 times more salary. So there's no such thing as poor people. They are only poor places. This rural urban, just fries my brain because I don't know the difference. What is urban? Is it, obviously it's 10 million people in mega cities. Is it our 52 cities with more than 1 million people? Is it the 5,400 places where I have jobs? Or is it only the 250 places which had more than 100 jobs live at 7 o'clock this morning for us? Or is it the 500 places which had more than 50 jobs live this morning? So I find it hard to distinguish between the two. And obviously from where I sit, India doesn't have a jobs problem, we have a wages problem. We don't have a shortage of land, labor, capital. You could fit every Indian household and give them half an acre, they would fit into Rajasthan and Haryana. We don't have a shortage of labor, 35% of our labor force is Vela. We don't have a shortage of capital, 50% of India's foreign direct investment since 1947 came in the last 5 years. So when we deserve capital, we can raise it. So I think our problem is really productivity from my vantage. Economists call it total factor productivity. The human race calls it entrepreneurship, innovation, and sort of technology. But, my civil servant parents, whenever they think I'm getting too big, or as I'm getting bigger, they keep reminding myself that, we don't live in an economy, we live in a society. I find it hard to distinguish, or friends like Yamini write stuff about false binaries, right? About the false binary between rural and urban, the false binary between formal and informal, and the false binary between sort of farm and non-farm. You know, the suit boot people like us are used to this chicken and egg problem. You know, you can't create a great company without raising money, but you can't raise money without a great company. All of us first generation entrepreneurs whose parents didn't have money, you know, you can't solve the chicken and egg problem without becoming vegetarian, right? Doing something completely different. And I think I'm a little tired of this binary or chicken and egg problem continuously being highlighted. So I would just suggest, you know, there are 5 geographies of work, the way from my vantage point: the physical geography, the sectoral geography, the financial geography, the enterprise geography, and the education geography. The physical geography is obvious. I tell this story in thousands of ways in thousands of different cities. You can change the numbers of cities. We have, you know, hundreds of job fairs every year. I had a kid in Gwalior tell me, give me 4,000 rupees in Gwalior, 6,000 rupees in Gurgaon, 11,000 rupees in Delhi, and 20,000 rupees in Bombay. My bags are packed. Tell me where you want me to go. He said, why do you need 4 times more money to go to Bombay? He said, jitne bacche Bombay 10,000 mein gaye the, sab wapas aa gaye. Khana, rehna, office jana. Nahi banta hai. You know, living, eating, and commuting doesn't work. I told him, but tum to second class fail hai. Why will I give you 20,000 rupees? He said, मैं graduate से खाना कम थोड़ी खाता हूँ, right? So he wasn't asking for a salary. He was asking for reimbursement. I think that's really important at the heart. He wasn't really asking me for salary, and because employers care about nominal wages and employees care about real wages. And the problem in rural is real wages, which is productivity, and the problem in urban areas is sort of nominal wages, which is costs. So whether we're going to take jobs to people, I don't know. You can bring people to jobs if we sort of think about this gap between nominal and urban real wages more creatively. I think the only way, sectoral geography of work, at least to me, is obvious. The only way to help farmers in India is to have less farmers. As far as the debate between services and manufacturing, this boat has to row with both the oars. Obviously, we'll never get to the peak of any country's labor force in manufacturing, which was Britain in World War II, 45%. America peaked at 33, China peaked at 28. But obviously, 11% of our labor force in manufacturing is the wrong number. And we have to think about that sectoral transformation in ways. I think the financial geography of work is really important because money is a fuel. Our credit to GDP ratio is only 50%. Obviously, China's 300% is the wrong number, but we have to get to 100% credit to GDP. But we tend to think of finance only in credit. We don't think of it in terms of equity, right? And why has cricket become more meritocratic in India? Why is IPL just better than Ranji Trophy? Why has entertainment become more meritocratic in India? Why is OTT better than Bollywood? Because, you know, Prashant Gandhi just makes a better Harshad Mehta than Abhishek Bachchan because Abhishek Bachchan is sort of inherited his thing. So I think business has become more meritocratic because of private equity and venture capital. You know, my parents, when I started my own company, they were always worried because as civil servants, you think you have to be Birla and Tata to start your own company, right? You have to have money to start your own company, while private equity and venture capital, which provides equity, really breaks that cycle of chicken and egg. And obviously, we peaked at $73 billion of private equity in 2021. We'll probably do 20, 30 billion. But I think we tend to obsess with credit. I think we have to think about public markets and private equity markets at real levels of sort of productivity. I think the enterprise geography of work is quite obvious. There's 63 million enterprises in India. 12 million of them don't have an office. 12 million work from home. Only 12 million are registered for GST. Only 1 million pay Provident Fund. There are only 25,000 companies in India with a paid up capital of more than 10 crores. So 63 million enterprises means jack if it translates to only 25,000 companies with a paid up capital of $1.5 million. And why is this? It's not cultural explanations for this drive me crazy, right? Because at best they are the soft bigotry of low expectations, and at worst they are racism. But clearly an entrepreneur can create 2 kinds of companies, a baby and a dwarf. Both are small, but the baby is going to grow and the dwarf is going to stay there. Why is India a nation of corporate dwarfs? And at least my explanation is quite clear. It's regulatory cholesterol. We have 67,000 compliances for employers. We have 6,700 filings. And we have 21,000 ways to go to jail. It really makes no sense. You don't put people in jail. So why do you have 21,000 provisions? And for big people like me now, I mean, I'm a big company now. I was very small 20 years ago. I have 180 guys in regulatory affairs whose only job is handling the regulatory cholesterol. Now, when I was small, I couldn't handle that. But in the first year of Team Lease, we had 380 inspections. That is more than one a day. That just makes no sense. And obviously, I was straight out of college when I was starting this company 20, 25 years ago. We somehow managed. Now that we're becoming big, I don't even care about it. It's a thorn in the flesh. It's not a dagger in the heart. But for small companies, it's a dagger in the heart. So I would think hard about regulatory cholesterol than some of the other stuff. Obviously, the last geography of work where I'll close is education. Repair, prepare, and matching. Repair is, mismatch is repairing supply for demand. You have to prepare supply for demand, and you have to connect supply for demand. Yet all our education reports just broke this connectivity between repair, prepare, and matching, right? The 1948 Radhakrishnan report, the 1968 Kothari Committee report, or the 1986 National Education Policy. This was just people sitting in their room writing these policies who didn't understand that you can't partition education and employability, who didn't understand that the most embarrassing number now about India is only 50% of our kids are in government schools, who really didn't understand at least what I have learned in the last 25 years about the 5 design principles. All that we have to do is learning while earning, because most kids can't pay their way while they are learning. We need learning by doing. Soft skills are not taught, they are caught. We need learning with qualification modularity. A 3-month certificate has to become an opening balance for a 1-year diploma, has to become an opening balance for a 3-year degree. We need learning with multiple classrooms. We cannot have an apartheid between online, on-job, on-campus, and on-site classrooms. And obviously, we need learning with signaling value. Yamini went to Cambridge, LSE, and Stephens. These are good places to be at, but they're better places to be from, right? so that's what she's milking. So I think that learning with signaling value is really, really important. And we should think about that, because if you can't put all these 5 geographies of work, this conference should not be about rural development, it should be about development. Because that's what strength is. My favorite poet is Ramdari Singh Dinkar, right? And Shama Shobhati us bhujang ko jiske paas garal ho. Only snakes with venom can be kind, benevolent, and generous, right? But what is strength? Is it economy or is it society? And why have we managed to create the world's largest democracy on the infertile soil of the world's most hierarchical society? But why didn't we create the world's largest economy? It should technically be easier to create an economy than a democracy. But I think, at least from my vantage, when I landed in the US in August 94 for my MBA, there was a front page article on the Wall Street Journal which said that India is more interesting than important. I hope that journalist is eating the newspaper on which he wrote that, right? Because what's happening in India really isn't once in a decade or once in a millennium. It's really once in the lifetime of a country. We did miss our twisted destiny, but I think our new appointment is about formalization, urbanization, industrialization, financialization, and human capital. And I think that's an appointment we will keep. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Manesh. Very, very illuminating. That's great. We're running very short on time. I did want to ask all the panelists just the same question, and it's just a 30-second answer. What makes you optimistic for India's future? What's the biggest source of your optimism?
Women's collectives and deepening of democracy through community organizations. That has begun to hold all levels of parliamentary systems more accountable than in the past, and that makes a difference.
I'm a pessimist by nature, but therefore I'm going to say 2 things. One thing that makes me optimistic is that actually both Manish and I said the same thing, even though we said it very differently, which is that we should be talking about the Indian economy and jobs, not about rural, urban, or rural development and urban development. But I also think the second thing, we are at this important cusp where we perhaps are looking at the first generation of young Indians going to school whose mothers have at least sat in school for somewhere between 5 to 8 years. That can be genuinely transformative in the kind of human capital that we build if we leverage it well.
I'd just say higher aspirations. The Indian economy was not self-employed, it was self-exploiting. right? The two labor market shock absorbers in India have been agriculture and self-employment. And they were essentially built on self-exploitation. And for the next generation, self-exploitation is just not acceptable. And that you can view that as petrol that will burn down the house, or you can view it as rocket fuel that will take us to the moon. I think that that rising aspiration was really, really important for us to go to the next orbit, and I think it's already here.
Thank you so much to all the panelists. That was a rapid 1 hour tour through the rural and urban landscape of India. I found it extremely illuminating. I hope all of you did as well, from breaking silos to investing in human capital, improved governance, regulation, and allowing the entrepreneurial spirit of India to come through. So once again, thanks to all of the panelists. That was a fantastic discussion. And to everyone else, please enjoy your lunch. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Can we have a bigger round of applause for all the panelists for the lovely session? And what is really wonderful to hear, chahe wo opening session ho ya ye wala, a lot of stress is being given to women self-help groups and the women power to take the country forward, not only rural India. Thank you so much. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll take a very short lunch break. I have to say very short because please come back on time, sharp 1:30, so that we can begin our sessions post-lunch. And they're very engaging and interesting sessions. So let's begin on time, sharp 1:30. Thank you.